Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian at the Surface Navy Association's 29th Annual Symposium and Trade Show here in Arlington, Virginia. Our coverage here is sponsored by Raytheon, and we're honored to have with us Rear Admiral Ron Boxall, who is the Navy's surface warfare requirements boss at the Pentagon. Sir, thanks very much for taking time to meet with us.
My pleasure, Vago. It's good to be here.
I want to start off. I mean, obviously, you took the job last July. This is your first SNA when you're in this key job where nobody has any demands on you and is not asking you questions incessantly. So thank you for being patient with us. What are some of your priorities on the job, and what's the message that you're delivering to the surface warfare community?
Well, we're here to talk about distributed lethality and a return to sea control, and that's the message that we have in the Surface Force strategy that's been communicated by Admiral Tom Roden, who's the director of, he is the SWO boss, the Surface Warfare boss in San Diego, but he's with the fleet. So my job is I work for the CNO to ensure that we buy the things we need for that surface Navy to do the things. We want to be aligned with both the fleet, but we also have to balance the priorities that we have in the building. So that's kind of what we will do here. So my priorities are flowing from that strategy, and you think about distributed lethality, we start thinking about what the Vice Chief said about yesterday. The Vice Chief was here. He was very clear. You probably heard him. He said, size matters. Size matters for the size of the fleet, but size doesn't matter if you're not whole. So if you're not whole, meaning you haven't paid for the modernization of those forces, if you haven't manned and trained and equipped them, and they become hollow, then you take some fraction from that forces, which is like not having them in the first place. And he also said no matter what happens is you have to have the people are the most important thing. And so we look at the training and we look at all those things, not just the missile or the defense, but the people, and to ensure that we're whole in the maintenance and modernization side before we continue to get that capability that we need to get distributed lethality operationalized.
Your job is also that balance point, right, in terms of what the fleet needs, balancing the requirement against resources and making sure that equation works out well. There is a sense that there will be more money, but the VCNO, Admiral Moran, yesterday said, there may not be as much money as we think, and we're still going to have to make some really tough choices. As you look at it from a choice environment, what's the prioritization of resources? Is it something that has to go into readiness to make sure that the 274 or so ships we have now are actually able to deploy without wearing the sailors out? Well,
certainly that's very high on the list. I mean, we like to do a little of all that. The question is, how much can you afford to do of each? Certainly we're looking at the modernization, most likely the maintenance piece, because if we don't buy those shipyards and the work we need to do and all that stuff, the readiness declines, they don't meet their timelines to deploy, they don't train in time, or they're not ready to train, and then we're sending forces forward that may be late or not as trained or don't have enough people or whatever. So readiness is going to be high for all of us no matter what. At the same point, we know we got to continue to pace the threat that's out there. The threats are going to get tougher and tougher every day, and so we bought a lot of ships over time, and we built a lot of ships over time, means we have to modernize them over time. So we did have, at one time, for example, we were building 5 destroyers per year at one point. Right. Well, those ships are due, and they need to be updated and modernized. And when we do that, we find that they're incredibly capable, and they'll go for a much longer period of time. When we don't, we get on the death spiral of, we just keep them going, and then at some point it becomes, they're only a few more years of service life. We want to ensure that we are modernizing those ships, that we invest in the hull mechanical and electrical improvements those ships have to meet their service life, at the same point giving them the combat capability that they need, especially in a distributed lethality environment.
Well, that takes us to the future surface combatant. That's something you've been getting a lot of questions about. Admiral Roden's been getting a lot of questions on that. And you guys are really thinking it through. And you talked about, age of ships. Amazing as it is, even though the Burke class is under production, first ship came out in '92. I remember when Ticonderoga was the newest, hottest thing in the fleet. Those ships, the last of which was built quite a long time ago. We've been retiring some of them, or some of them will come back. Or at least that's part of the congressional plan. As you guys are looking at the future surface combatant and combatants, what do these ships look like? Everybody is looking at Flight 3 as a bridge to the future. What does the future cruiser look like? Is there room for a frigate there? Walking on the floor, every year there's more juice behind the idea of a longer range, leggier, multi-purpose frigate, that there are folks who are saying the LCS doesn't address that. As you look at that whole package, give us some of your thoughts on every quadrant of that, I would like to get your ideas across that whole waterfront.
Well, first, Vago, thank you for reminding me that I'm old also and that those ships are starting to be older and decommissioned. But the Future Surface Combatant is a study that we're doing to follow on. Of course, we did a small surface warfare study when we were looking at what we would transition from an LCS to a frigate to address some of the things you talked about. You know, its lethality, its range, its capability, its survivability. So we've put some of that stuff in, and we think we've got a very good plan with this ship, because what's the alternative? If right now we've got that ship, it's out there. You know, some complain that it's taken us too long to kind of derive this to something. I would say just the opposite. We have now got the LCS in a place with its price stability is there. It's a modular design. It's giving us the capabilities we need in the fleet. We're going to come out with an anti-submarine warfare mission package, which will be the first variable depth sonar we have in our fleet right now. So everyone shows me capabilities that we have in other nations' frigates and these, but the reality is that this is, you know, for the size the frigate is going to be, with a helicopter pad the size it has, the unmanned capability, the survivability that we're building and progressing on top of LCS to get more. These are the things that are going to make that frigate a much more capable platform. And oh yeah, by the way, we're going to put OTH missiles on that ship, over-the-horizon capability that I would have loved to have had if I was a strike group commander out in the South China Sea. You talk about range, and range is always important when you look at ships. And certainly we want to get as much range, and we're going to look at that with the frigate, you know, what we get from additional range versus, you know, you're swapping something. If you take range,
right,
then you're going to take weight that you can put something on. We'll find that right balance. But remember that these ships are forward stationed, and their operational availability is, you know, they're going to stay over forward for a long time. We're going to rotate crews, different model. So when you look at it that way, and what, you know, we know if we're going to have them forward, they can get to where they need to be with the range they have. If they're going to be in Bahrain, they can get, and those all went into the small surface combatant study. So we feel pretty confident in what we have as an LCS, especially as it follows on to the frigate. So we're going to continue to push. The other thing we don't see now, because we're here today and not in the future, is that we know that the modularity concept built into LCS will get us capability more quickly, and from the designer to the actual operational output, because we have a common design. We can build it while the ship's out there, and then when it comes back, we plop it off, plop it back on, and out we go again. Not what we're doing with our cruisers and our destroyers, which take a while to go in, and it's a lot of shipyard work to do the modernizations. You asked about the future surface combatant. You know, everyone wants to say, what's the next cruiser going to be, or what's the next? That's not the way we're looking at the problem. We're looking at the problem as, what do we need surface ships to do in the air domain in the future? What is on a large platform? What is on a smaller platform? Can we use unmanned to push our radars forward? I mean, you give me the biggest ship in the world, and we're still we have problems with physics. You know, radar doesn't bend around the corner of the globe, right? So if that's true,
you could put the radar on a 1,000-foot mast.
Right. But you're still ultimately going to, somebody would want to go further, right? Until we change the physical properties. So we're looking at ways to do that, using space, using unmanned, using other platforms, using things that are already out there in the air, in the subsurface, on the surface now. So we have to look at the wider domain of surface warfare, you know, and then also the air domain, the integrated air and missile defense side of it. You know, the threats that are going to be coming are pretty significant. So how we use not just Navy surface, but Navy air, Navy space, joint assets. So this you know, what we do with the next cruiser, we can give you a requirement for the biggest cruiser in the world that would have a 1,000-foot mast and have all these weapons and everything else like that, and it would price us out of the business. We'd have 3 of them. We're looking for that balance, that where we can say, hey, here's the capability I need, here's the mix of high, low, and unmanned platforms, and a combat system that will hold it all together. That's what we're looking for the follow-on for this. DDG Flight 3 is going to give us an amazing improvement in capability. That's a 30 times more sensitive radar. It's digital. It's something that can be scalable, so we can make it bigger, make it smaller to make it more sensitive or less sensitive. If we can make it a smaller version of it and put it on unmanned or small surface combatants, what we needed the big cruiser radars to do in the past is not the way we'll need to do it in the future. So it's very important for us that we continue to have an ability to do air defense commander responsibilities and how we do that. So that's part of the discussion. So we're looking at all those things in the future surface combatant. And I think you know, this is a great opportunity as we, you know, look at what we have out there, fielding some. We've got some efforts out there in the unmanned world, as you know right now. You've probably seen Sea Hunter and the medium displacement undersea, or medium displacement unmanned surface vehicle.
Right.
that we have out operating in San Diego right now. That's a project between DARPA and ONR, and we're looking at a lot of those things of how it can operate in teaming with our existing manned ships and platforms to keep our most vital assets as survivable as we can. I tell my team all the time, I said, I want things to be as small as they can be, but big enough to do what we need them to do. So I favor many over big, because in the distributed lethality concept, the more things we have out there with range and sensors to do things widens my geographic area, and it's a fundamental premise of the distributed lethality concept.
I was joking with the 1,000-foot mast. That's why we put airplanes on ships so that the spotter and everything gets a little bit, bit taller. But taking it to the unmanned realm, right? How are you envisioning unmanned systems? Because the undersea guys have been using it for a little while, more so on the remotely operated side of it. Obviously on the air side, we've had a bit of it. But what are some of the holistic ways that you're thinking about an unmanned surface architecture and how it supports the manned fleet and vice versa?
Well, I'm not looking at an unmanned surface architecture. I'm looking at a surface architecture that includes surface manned platforms. It includes air. It may include a long range, something that we have out there called TURN, which we're also doing at DARPA, which gives me a persistent intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance responsibility back to the fleet, whether it be to me or other platforms. The more things we put out there that support more domains is a good thing. Surface ships are key to that. We support the undersea domain, the surface domain, the air domain, and space and cyber. We also operate there. So if that's the premise, then I don't want an unmanned for unmanned sake. I want an unmanned to the extent it makes all my other platforms better. If it's the best platform to do something, then we should have that do it in place of something else. If it's not, that's the balance we're looking for. So we're doing some initiatives, some prototypes that are out there right now, both surface, air, subsurface. Unmanned's a big deal, and it should be. It's where I see a lot of value coming. If we don't have to put people on it and all the survivability that comes with it, whether it be an air or a ship or a undersea platform, then that gives me savings that I use for something else. I think there's been a reluctance in the past of surface warfare directors who have to produce ships to not necessarily go and consider those, because everyone wants to talk about what that next ship is. There will be ships. The surface Navy is about ships, and we will always have ships. But how we complement those with unmanned is going to be a very key decision, and we don't want to get it wrong.
Let's talk a little bit about weapons and the threat. If you look at China, for example, the missile rings and the capabilities that are being fielded are to push U.S. and allied forces farther and farther and farther away from their shows. Obviously, they want to try to get everybody to the second island chain. If you look at DF-21, DF-26, number of other weapons, obviously there's greater density the closer in you get, but some of these systems have legs and can reach out and touch you. There are hypersonic weapons that folks have. I was joking with another retired surface warfare friend of mine. We were talking about the BrahMos missile and how that thing can ruin your day even without a warhead on it, because it's hitting you at Mach 3 and has a fairly decent range. Is the Navy investing in the right kinds of systems? And is the threat going to drive a more significant requirements change so that the U.S. Navy gets into the far longer range weapon business to really reach out and touch somebody from far, far greater distances? A friend of mine was telling me, anti-surface, it's in double-digit ranges that we've ever shot things for, so actually we don't need something that's a longer range weapon, for example, whereas some folks are saying, no, a lot longer range. Where do you fall on that discussion? What does that future operating environment look like that's shaping your decisions about some of the subsystems and weapons that the Navy's going to need?
So you've thrown a lot at me, but you should have just taken the surface force strategy, because you just recited some of the key tenets.
I wanted to give you an opportunity to recite the surface warfare strategy.
Well, again, we need to, some of those platforms that can shoot these amazing systems at us, we have to be prepared to do it. And one of the best ways to think about doing it is put the offense on defense, and we need to take our offensive weapons out and give the combatant commanders more options, so they have to worry about that. Whoever may want to make our day bad for whatever reason. You described things with different countries, but I'll broaden it. This is technology getting better, and it's now applying into weapons. So we have to do better at this as a domain view. So the things we've invested in the electronic protection and attack business is central to the distributed lethality concept. So space, the integration of space, hard and soft kill is going to continue to become incredibly important, which is why we have to look at this from a domain standpoint. If you're the integrated air and missile defense, you don't care if your capability is coming from a space asset, from an airplane, from a ship, from a forward station submarine or from whatever source. You don't care. You just want to be able to bring it all to bear. That's the way we fight. So we need to buy things that way and start thinking about that before. For example, we've just went out and did a test, the FTM-27 test out in Pacific Missile Range Facility in Kauai. I was out there for it. I did the first sea-based terminal shot for operational employment when I was the commanding officer of USS Lake Erie, our ballistic missile defense ship. And now, here we are a few years later, taking an SM-6 missile that we use for air defense and using it to shoot down a re-entering missile from space in the terminal phase of its flight. This is an incredible capability against very challenging medium-range ballistic missile threat. This was done with one of our baseline 9C, our NIFCA, or long-range air platforms, which also has been modernized to have ballistic missile defense capability both in its SM-3s, which are its exo-atmospheric missiles, and also its endo-atmospheric missiles in sea-based terminal with an SM-6. One ship can hit it in the exo and the endo for those types of threats. So layered defense is a piece of that. The other piece is the sensitivity of the radar. We're doing that with an off-the-shelf processing with our existing SPY radar we've had for years. Take that capability, ratchet it up with an SPY 6 radar that we're seeing out at the same range out in Kauai, and you start to get an amazing sense of what we're doing against those very, very fast-changing threats. Now, we also have, when you talk about, what are we doing, this is not a surface Navy problem. The ones you described with the very long, very fast hypersonic missiles, yes, they're happening at sea, but they're happening elsewhere also. Just like we have the Missile Defense Agency that is chartered with protecting us from ballistic missiles, we now have to have a healthy dialogue about things that live in the hypersonics world. So we're going to continue to have those things, but this is not unique to surface warfare. This is against land targets and against all services. So we're working in the joint arena with the Missile Defense Agency to help capture what we think those threats look like, at what pace they'll be fielded, and to ensure that we have not just hard kill capability, not just sensing capability, but the ability across all domains to include space, cyber, surface, joint, and all to bear against that threat.
And let me ask you lastly about auxiliaries, but also ask you about the Amphibious Force, which you touch, right? I mean, obviously there's a separate office for that. But as you're looking at that future operating environment for all of these other ships, how do some of those threat profiles change even some requirements you may have for auxiliary and support ships, or even for your Amphibious Force in terms of self-defense?
So certainly we're going to continue to look at, as we operate in those very long ranges, we do have to ensure that we have the logistics. As our force grows, if it grows, we will need more logistics. If we get to the ships, the numbers that we need, we know that decreases our risk. So we're looking at all that as part of when I look at this as a domain view, and I say, well, right now, auxiliaries and refueling ships are not they're not my responsibility. So does that mean we shouldn't look at them? No, I think just the opposite. I need to look across the surface domain and say, look, what do I need that's in mine? Ships, missiles, and oh yeah, by the way, what do submarines provide me in the surface domain? Quite a few things, as it turns out. Then you look over on the other side and you say, well, what about, do we have enough logistics force to do it the way we would employ them and assess that into it? That's the value of looking at it from a domain standpoint by me having to be responsible, because I'm not going to buy one logistics ship this year that comes out of mine. But that's a flawed way of looking at it. And so we're going to change that and ensure that we have the broader discussion of what we need across amphibious, auxiliary. That's all part of this. So when we talk about a wholeness of the fleet, we're not just talking about each ship and that it can get out, but the fleet as a whole. Do we have all the things we need to take the fight to the enemy, keep it there, and take a low risk to our forces as they operate?
Sir, thanks very much. Fair winds and following seas on the assignment.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks, Fago.